Cool. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. Whether you're listening live or to the recording, I hope you're having a wonderful day. This is Jules from Blocknative, also speaking through a conduit due to technical difficulties. We have a lot to cover today and not a whole lot of time. So if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to make my best effort to weave them in. I'm joined today with my dear friend and colleague, Blair Marshall, one of our project managers and ERC-4337 researchers at Blocknative. Don't know if he's gonna get off mute and say hi. Make sure he's still around. Muted by host. Okay, let's see.
I would have left too. I understand. It's been a while.
All right, let's see. Did that work? Can you speak now?
That works. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Yes. Hey, I'm Blair, product manager at Blocknative. Been with Blocknative since January 2021. So I feel like a old timer at the company, and recently been doing a lot of work in ERC-4337 as Blocknative kind of explores how we want to contribute to this new emerging ecosystem, and excited to be here to talk to John.
Awesome. So we also have operating through Learn as a Conduit, a man probably needs no introduction in the 4337 space, the incredible John Rising. John is co-founder of StackUp, a 4337 infrastructure provider that's really paving the way and making account abstraction more of a reality.
Hey everyone, happy to be here.
John, I hear you're also quite literally a rocket man. How'd that rocket launch go yesterday?
Yeah, I prefer Rocket Boy because I still feel like every time I do anything with rockets, I get humbled pretty quickly because reality always wins, unlike in software where you can kind of hack around things. But yeah, so before getting into blockchain and crypto, I was a rocket engineer for 8 years. So I worked at Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, and Relativity Space, which just had the maiden launch of their Turn 1 launch vehicle, which I was actually the first employee at Relativity and the head of engineering, or head of vehicle engineering there for 4.5 years. So it was a pretty special day for me yesterday to see it finally fly.
Nice. And now you're deep in the 4337 space, which coincidentally has also been lifting off, much like that rocket. It feels like account abstraction and ERC-4337 in particular has really taken Ethereum by storm these past few months. And what's interesting is account abstraction itself isn't actually that new of a topic, right? 4337 was first proposed nearly 2 years ago in 2021, and Vitalik's been trying to get some form of account abstraction through since damn near the start of Ethereum, which really begs the question, what exactly is account abstraction and why is it so important?
Yeah, you bet. So in fact, Vitalik actually wrote a paper detailing account abstraction before the even official launch of Ethereum. So it's certainly something that people have wanted for a very long time. So at high level, account abstraction is a blockchain technology that allows user accounts to be programs on chain instead of just a pair of keys or external to the blockchain itself. Originally, account abstraction meant that very specifically that a user could use any arbitrary validation logic and that would be allowed by the blockchain. But that would require changes to how the blockchain fundamentally works. And so the recent development with ERC-4337 is basically a set of infrastructure to get around needing to change the blockchain itself. But yeah, so at a super high level, account abstraction just means, hey, people's accounts are now programs on chain instead of just a pair of cryptographic keys.
One thing I always find fascinating when I read that 4337 spec is it clearly states that the end goal is for users to not ever have a need to use EOAs anymore, which, that out loud, it always kind of scares people. Could you explain a little bit about what an EOA is and why exactly we would want to get rid of them?
Yeah, you bet. So EOA is an acronym for externally owned, or initialism for externally owned account, which basically just means an EOA is a number, which is a private key, an associated other number, which is a public key. So you've got this pair of keys, one of which you hold, one of which others can see and send you funds to. And that's how you currently interact with the blockchain. This is very, very simple from a technical perspective. However, what that means to a user is that there's a single security policy for everyone on chain, which is, hey, you either have like God mode access to your account, like you're always admin, or you have no access. There, of course, have been a lot of like nightmare scenarios of people like, losing their keys and losing all the access to all of the funds in their account, or inversely, having their keys compromised and having anyone able to access their account, or bad actors. So the reason why we would want to get rid of EOAs, really what it means is to allow for additional ways for people to access their like accounts and their funds beyond having the keys like externally owned. And by putting the logic on chain for access to a user's account, it allows people to still be full custodians of their accounts without needing to rely on any other like external services or other kind of like hacks to access it. But in short, in order to use an EOA, you basically need to be an expert at blockchain to use it safely, which is a huge barrier to normal people being able to unlock the value of crypto and of blockchains. So making accounts programmable allows us to basically abstract the hard parts of crypto for users. So like they don't need to really know how blockchains fundamentally work to use it safely.
So when it comes to 4337 and these programmable smart contract accounts, wallets will essentially be starting from zero when it comes to adoption, right? And we all know that most people tend to be resistant to change. I can already hear users saying, my MetaMask works fine for me. Why should I switch over to a smart contract wallet? Can you explain a little bit on the additional benefits that smart contract accounts might have over these EOAs?
Yeah, happy to. And to be clear, people will still, of course, be able to use their existing, MetaMask and EOAs. And to be frank, if people have a system that works for them and they're already blockchain experts, like I for myself am, even though I'm helping pioneer this 4337 stuff, my vault is an EOA on a hardware wallet with the keys, split up between different locations like everyone else. So if you have something that works for you, that's great. However, there are many cases where you want to be able to have more flexible access to your funds and your account, and why it's like pretty difficult for people to use crypto in day-to-day life is because they are basically risking losing everything in their account on every transaction. So, but there's still a lot of reasons why you want to switch. So it enables you to have security settings directly in your account. It enables you to recover your account. And what that means from like a technical level is you basically change the keys that are associated with approving transactions for your account. You can also do things like batched transactions where you can do multiple operations at once, making anything in crypto, from many multiple complex steps into just one click. As well as, using alternative methods of authentication. So there are some experiments right now exploring, using Face ID directly or verifying a Face ID on chain, or using existing 2FA methods or social logins to allow people to add and remove keys that have limited access to a person's account. So the reason why you'd want to do it is, frankly, out of convenience. It's because it allows you to very quickly, to access funds in your account without needing to worry about, breaking out your, ledger and being seen at a coffee shop with like your hardware wallet and being mugged, at ETH Denver because everyone's looking to see if anyone actually brought their wallet. So ultimately, I think it'll be a thing of convenience. But to be frank, the ecosystem kind of isn't quite there yet in terms of having a lot of wallet options for individuals. But those are coming up, and there's a lot of exciting projects in this space.
Cool. Does this?
I was just going to jump in and say the one thing I would add to what John has talked about so far is account abstraction. It has been tried and exists in other forms today. So I break the question down into like two different questions. One is, what makes 4337 special, and then what does account abstraction get us? And I think John's done a great job of highlighting exactly the benefits of account abstraction, but on the 4337 specific level, the two things that it really gets us is kind of this unified standard interface that everyone can use and leverage to create the building blocks to create these applications that we want to create. And it's also created this alternative relay mempool network that creates a decentralized or censorship resistant kind of intent layer that allows us to build on this foundation that we expect. Like we expect to be building on top of censorship resistance. And so some of the other attempts at account abstraction make this trade-off, whereas 4337 is all about building on top of this permissionless censorship resistant foundation. And so I think that's kind of an important point for why 4337.
I agree. Those are two excellent points. I know that there are some people on this call already who have a lot of background in the history of account abstraction, some that likely do not. But in short, the innovation for ERC-4337 is it creates a second transaction pool that runs in parallel to the existing transaction pool. That new transaction pool is designed specifically to handle transactions from smart contract accounts. We call those transaction objects user operations, but that's getting a little bit into the weeds. But basically, it is the layer that can translate a user's intent to the actual transactions that need to occur on chain. The reason why we need to have a parallel or alternative transaction pool is so that we don't have to change the core code of the blockchain. And so we can figure out what account abstraction needs to look like before enshrining it on chain by changing the core blockchain code itself, which is something that is very difficult to do. And so ERC-4337 allows us to have account abstraction that is completely, censorship resistant completely, that is censorship resistant, that people can kind of rally around today and start using with today, so that smart contract accounts can now be interoperable. A lot of part of the issue with smart contract wallets before is interoperability with the rest of the ecosystem, simply because they had to rely on kind of like their own standards. And so everyone moving toward the same standard is like a huge unlock. Absolutely.
Yep, completely agree.
So this all sounds quite computationally heavy. Are there any trade-offs that come with this new programmability that 4337 adds?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that typically jumps out to people who are starting to understand 4337 is, a lot of this work is done on chain. So, it's not enshrined in the protocol itself. So it has to be done through smart contracts. And, anytime you do anything on chain, that costs gas. And so there is some gas cost considerations and trade-off here on some of the transactions that you will be doing. We'll get into bundlers later in the conversation, but there are ways to reduce those gas costs. There's actually a great blog post by Vitalik on ERC-20 transfers and how you can use on rollups specifically, and how you can do ERC-20 transfers on rollups using 4337 and some kind of neat compression tricks, and you can actually make it cheaper from a gas perspective than like a mainnet ERC-20 transfer. So there are ways to reduce these gas costs, but it is something to consider, the trade-off between doing a regular EOA transaction versus a smart account transaction, user operation, I guess. John, I'd be interested in hearing about how you think about the gas costs as it relates to different networks. Mainnet versus a rollup versus another layer one.
Yeah, you bet. So to give people an idea, right now I think just doing a single ETH transfer costs like roughly like $1 or so in US dollars, and doing that transfer with ERC-4337 is a few multiples more expensive. The reason for that, again, is that the logic for verifying the signature on chain of the owner of the smart contract account basically has to be done, as well as like other validation and execution logic. So it does end up being more expensive. Right now, it costs about $25 to deploy a simple ERC-4337 smart contract account versus, of course, free for an EOA. I think that we will, and that's all on Ethereum mainnet. I think we will really see smart contract accounts proliferate on rollups and alternative layer ones that are designed to trade off like transaction volume for other things on the blockchain. Whereas Ethereum will become more of a settlement layer, and a lot of people won't be transacting directly on Ethereum mainnet except for bigger, more complex stuff. And instead, the majority of users of account abstraction, or rather of smart accounts, will be on rollups, so they'll notice less. And on rollups, we've got a lot more tricks to play with than on Ethereum mainnet to make things cheaper and easier for users. So to harken back to Vitalik's demonstration that you can actually make ERC20 transfers cheaper is due to the fact that you can use alternative method transactions. So you can actually aggregate a whole bunch of signatures together into a single signature, and the majority of costs of rollups is actually in like verifying the change in state and taking that call data, and so you can make that significantly smaller. So I think in practice we're going to see a lot less adoption of ERC-4337 on Ethereum mainnet, but correspondingly a lot of adoption and probably smart accounts being the default on rollups, even non-ERC-4337 rollups, such as those with native account abstraction.
Awesome. We started talking a little about actual 4337 transactions now. I'd love to take a deeper dive into this because 4337 is not a protocol change. All the changes it introduces must need to work within the existing framework of the network to make for some really super interesting changes to the Web3 transaction lifecycle that we know today. Blair, I know you helped in reviewing this new mental model that our CEO, Matt Cutler, recently shared on Twitter. Can you talk a little about how Web3 transactions work today and what exactly 4337 is going to change? And for anyone who's a visual learner like me, our colleague Laurence is going to share a copy of that mental model in the comments below.
Yeah, sure. So hat tip to Matt for kind of framing this mental model up. Highly recommend checking out his thread and especially the visualizations in there. Thank you for that. So to understand the new quote unquote new transaction lifecycle, just go over the normal transaction lifecycle. So today, you have a EOA, you sign that transaction as John was describing earlier with your keys, and you sign that transaction object, and that transaction object, it tells the network, or it tells the virtual machine what it wants to do, what function it wants to call on a smart contract. And so that signed transaction is either broadcast publicly into the mempool or sent privately to builders. And so these builders get a hold of your transaction and they add it to their blocks, and then they relay that to validators, and then validators will confirm that on chain for you. And so it's a pretty simple, at this point, kind of supply chain. And so what 4337 does is, since this is not a protocol, we still need to have some way of going from EOA, a signed EOA transaction that the EVM understands, to getting on chain. And so what 4337 does is it creates this new intent layer more upstream from that signed EOA. And so before you get to that signed EOA, you move the user's interaction to before that point. And you add in this new object called a user operation. And you can just kind of think of a user operation as like a transaction. It has some more details in the object itself that I won't go into here, but so you have these user operations that these users create, and the point of these user operations is again to tell the EVM on what they're trying to achieve, and they send these user operations out into a new mempool, so a user operation mempool. and this will be a public, user operation mempool, and you'll have these things called bundlers, and bundlers are watching the user operation mempool. They will choose the user operations based on gas fees again, so I don't think the gas market changes too much. And they will include that as a large bundle of other user operations. And then the bundler itself is like this proxy EOA. And so it takes these user operations and turns them, composes signs, and turns them into transactions that the EVM can understand. And so it goes through the bundler as a signed transaction, and then it goes to the normal cycle that I described, first, where the bundler will typically, I think the thought here is that the bundler will include this privately in a block through builders, or itself will be a builder, and then it'll get confirmed on chain. So I guess to take a step back, the life cycle of a transaction today, you normally see it pending in the mempool and confirmed on chain. I think in 4337 world, you'll see it pending in the user operation mempool, and then it'll be confirmed on chain kind of privately through the bundler builder network. John, anything to add on that?
Yep, exactly. I mean, I'll add that from a user point of view. If you're just submitting a transaction, you very likely won't notice any changes, except maybe at first, as the infrastructure is coming online, it might take a little bit longer for your transaction to get included on chain compared to if you were to directly send a raw transaction. But in practice, it will be effectively the same for a user. So you will just see like, hey, you've submitted your transaction, it's pending, it's been completed.
Excellent. Thank you for that great explanation. The mental model definitely helps. It does look like we have a few questions from the community. Who will be a bundler and how do they actually make money?
Yeah, great question. So we talked about bundlers, but these bundlers, they're proxy EOAs, and they have a very important role in 4337. So when they see user operations, they need to simulate the user operation to ensure that it does a few checks, like it's valid signature and it has the gas costs, or the account has enough gas or ETH to pay for gas. And if it passes these checks, then it will broadcast that across the user operation mempool. And if it doesn't, then it won't. And so one of the key attributes here of a bundler is they need to be high uptime, low latency infrastructure that can simulate lots of user operations quickly. So in a world where everyone's doing user operations instead of transactions, this could be quite a high volume. So it's a lot of simulation needed. And my thought here is I break down bundlers into two categories. One would just be RPC providers, and the other would be builders. So in the RPC providers, I'm thinking more of like the Alchemies or Infuras of the world. And the reason for that is if you think about a transaction today, one of the questions people ask about 4337 is what's the incentive for a bundler to pass on their user operation publicly to the rest of the bundler network? And it's the same thing as a transaction today. When you broadcast a transaction through your MetaMask, it goes through Infura. And if Infura didn't, broadcast that out to the rest of the nodes in the network, it would probably mean that your transaction execution time would be pretty slow. And so as a user, you'd be pretty upset by this and just go find someone else. And so it's the same incentive here is you'll have RPC providers who are incentivized by their users to broadcast these user operations across the network to ensure that their user operation gets confirmed in a timely, quick manner. And then the other thing to consider for bundlers is they're kind of collecting a whole bunch of user operations at once and organizing those and ordering the transactions or the user operations in however they want. And so once you start talking about ordering transactions or ordering user operations, the first thing that comes to mind for me is MEV. And if there's MEV, then that's the kind of the builder searcher community. And so I think it would make a lot of sense for builders to also operate as bundlers. So they are getting, that immediate first view on what the block will look like, what the next block will look like.
That's an excellent explanation. Basically, in short, the incentives are designed to be pretty much the same as the existing, block building and transaction lifecycle, in the sense that people want to run bundlers because they will make money just like a miner or a validator, makes money. So additionally, and one of the reasons why I'm excited about ERC-4337 as a standard is exactly because of this incentive mechanism for bundlers. So that as soon as there is enough transaction volume for people to start really making money off of MEV and running ERC-4337 bundlers just simply off of the gas fees, rather than necessarily having we have at StackUp or Blocknative where you have a subscription service to access RPC. That's when we're really going to see the standard really kind of like start to fly, is because you have this network effect of a lot of incentive for different players in the ecosystem to start using it instead of like the current, or in parallel with the current like transaction infrastructure.
One component we haven't touched on, but we've received a couple of questions on, is this new concept of paymasters. How exactly do paymasters fit into all of this?
Yeah, so paymasters are a kind of like service, which is often a smart contract that can pay for gas fees on behalf of other smart contract accounts. So in practice, what that means is users can either have their transactions directly sponsored by an application, or they can use alternative methods of paying for gas fees rather than paying with ETH, or the native currency of the blockchain that they're using. So like one common example is a lot of people want to just load up dollars into their blockchain account and spend dollars and not need to hold ETH in their account to get started. And you can do that with paymasters, because a paymaster can accept, let's say, like USDC as compensation for sponsoring a transaction for users. So what that means from a user's point of view is, hey, I have money in my account, therefore I can spend money on the blockchain, rather than, hey, I have money in my account, why does OpenSea say I don't actually have money and I need to fill it up with this other currency? Can't I just swap it? Oh, let me go to Uniswap. Oh, wait, I can't do a trade because that also requires ETH in my account. So I've got to, load up on ETH somehow in some other way. So that's a pretty common friction point for new users. And also is just kind of like, I don't know, if you think of the incentives of any business on a blockchain, like if a user has money, you want them to be able to spend it on your blockchain, period, right? And so paymasters basically allow that.
Are dApps and wallets going to be their own paymasters, or do you foresee this being some net new business opportunity?
I foresee both. There's a lot of reasons why a wallet may want to have a paymaster service directly. One challenge for like wallet clients has been monetization. Typically, like MetaMask showed that you could actually make money off of doing swaps directly within an app. And that's a lot of kind of the business model. However, it is much more attractive for wallets to provide like a paymaster service, so that users' transactions get sponsored, and then they take a small cut of the gas fee in order to do that. So that's a very attractive business model for wallets that have otherwise kind of struggled to find a really good sustainable business model. Additionally, there will be a lot of applications, let's say, like games, for example, or NFT marketplaces or NFT minting platforms, where users, just by interacting with the platform, add value to the platform. And so as a consequence, they will be, they want to have an easy way to pay for transactions for users. And they will likely use a service like an API to do that, rather than setting up their own paymaster infrastructure, simply because it just takes a lot of time to set up, just in the same way that you use like an Alchemy or an Infura for sending blockchain transactions rather than running your own nodes yourself.
Yeah, the other thing I would add on paymasters is one of the things that always comes to mind for me is if you're allowing users to pay for gas with a ERC-20, the paymaster has to pay. So someone's got to pay the actual gas in the network. So the paymaster pays the ETH and draws some ERC-20 from the user's wallet. There's an exchange rate there, right? They have to choose how much they're going to draw like what's the equivalent amount of the ERC-20 they're going to draw. And so since there's an exchange rate there, if you have a lot of volume of these little tiny transactions, that always makes me think of like a market maker. And so you have like this order flow through a paymaster of ETH for ERC-20. And so someone's got to fill that order flow. And, you can get into all the ways that you can monetize order flow. But, through that exchange of ETH for ERC-20, I think there are new interesting ways for wallets, like you said, to monetize.
Yes, 100%. I actually think it would be very interesting to see a combination decentralized exchange and paymaster. But that's an area that comes with a lot of edge cases and caveats and things like that. But one of the cool things about ERC-4337 is people can actually experiment with this stuff. And right now, the default for creating a paymaster is either you just do the conversion and you charge a fee in order to, because the paymaster itself is the market maker and needs to be compensated for the risk that it is accepting for changes of prices between when it accepts the USDC and then when it actually converts it back into ETH. But this can also, in theory, be automated on-chain or even off-chain as well. But again, it does take a lot of order flow to make the economics make sense to do that in real time. And that in practice, I think we will see relatively high fees for paymasters at the very beginning, and then they'll trend towards zero as volume increases.
Yeah, I agree.
Based on this conversation, it sounds like a lot of this infrastructure is still being built. Are any projects actually using ERC-4337 today?
Yes, so there's a couple. In the wallet space, one live wallet is Patch Wallet, which basically is an ERC-4337 wallet where basically anyone has a wallet already for their social media account, and they can just authenticate with their social media and claim their account. Others under development include Soul Wallet and Candide Wallet, as well as some other wallet projects that are kind of more upstart. And then on the infrastructure, or rather the developer platform side, you have a lot of projects such as that are starting to adopt ERC-4337 or have been created specifically to cater to ERC-4337. So one of them is so this includes some Zero Dev, Peas, Biconomy is entering this space as well. EtherSpot is doing a fantastic job here as well. And I'm sure that I'm missing a whole bunch of others that I should be railed for getting on the spot. But there are already some existing services. So at StackUp, we offer just a straight up paymaster that allows people to sponsor transactions, and then we bill people at the end of the month, whatever the gas cost was at the time that the paymaster sponsored the transaction. And wallets like Soul Wallet and Candide Wallet are building their own paymasters, specifically in app. And those, I believe, are going to be ERC-20 paymasters. And we're also working on an ERC-20 paymaster as well. But again, it's still fairly early for the space. Again, the audit for the ERC completed 3 weeks ago. So, there isn't a ton live yet for users to be able to just go download a wallet and have the same interoperability and user experience as a MetaMask, but it's coming.
Yeah, I would also just note that there technically is not a user operation mempool, a public user operation mempool. We're still nailing down the P2P requirements for that mempool, and I think once we get that right, and bundlers are more connected to each other, I think that's a big unlock for future infrastructure and applications to be built using that. And so we're at Blocknative, we're watching closely as that develops and seeing what happens there.
So I know the space is still nascent, but I also know that Blocknative and StackUp teams are hard at work developing a lot of 4337 infrastructure. as John has already spoke a little bit about with your paymasters. Can you guys speak a little on what tools are out there that developers can use today?
Yeah, you bet. So on the infrastructure side, we have a few providers. I mean, there's of course StackUp, Blocknative as well, which really applaud Blocknative for being an early mover in this space. You also have companies such as EtherSpot, which I also want to give a shout out to because they've done a lot of great work on getting the like peer-to-peer mempool work done, which is fantastic. And you also have some of the larger providers who are also working on developing support. So, for example, Alchemy is developing their own bundler and are planning to support that as well. So that's like absolutely fantastic. On the smart contract side, if people want to use to create smart contract accounts, there are a few developer platforms that are developing or have some relatively forward SDKs. So one of those is like ZeroDev. Biconomy is also developing theirs, or rather, Biconomy's SDK exists, but they need to still develop the infrastructure in the back end to be fully like ERC-4337, but it exists. And furthermore, there are a bunch of like upstarts developing new smart contract account standards. One that I'm excited about is like Rhinestone, which was an ETH Denver hackathon project that's now becoming a business, which is developing modular ERC-4337 smart contract accounts, which is something we need to see a lot more of. And you can also find like some links to more and more resources. I'd turn blue if I tried to name everything in this call, like in the StackUp docs, or if you just like Google awesome account abstraction, a lot of people have created like lists of resources and projects that are in the space, but they're changing, you know, like week by week.
Yeah, I would give a big shout out to the StackUp docs and blog. They have helped me immensely along the way journey. From Blocknative side, you know, the three main things that we are contributing so far. One is we bundlers can send us your user operations, and we will get those confirmed on chain. And we have documentation for that, so you can check that out at docs.blocknative.com. The second thing is we have extended our mempool explorer so that you can see the full decoded payload of user operations as they come in. And so this will not only show, you know, the user operations, the handle ops function call, but this will also show that call data within that handle ops to see what it's actually doing on chain. So if it's like a Uniswap transaction, you know, you'll see in the subcalls that this is a Uniswap swap between two tokens. And then the final thing is we have a dashboard where you can see all these user operations come in. So this is for Go Early and Mainnet, and this is 4337.blocknative.com. But you know, I think more holistically, our view at Blocknative is, you know, we're an infrastructure provider. We provide tools to kind of abstract away any complexity for the application developer. And so as this ecosystem matures, we'll continue to look at where there is complexity and where we can create the tools to make it easier for dApp developers to build world-class applications and serve those next billion users.
Awesome. Thank you so much to both of you. Are there any other announcements, shout outs you want to share while you still have the mic?
I mean, I'll shout out John. John has been, I've learned so much from him on Twitter and Telegram and StackUp. So it's been really kind of a honor for me to host this or to speak with John on this call here. So shout out to John.
Thank you very much. You were much more eloquent than I am, even using my own words. So thank you very much for helping. Yeah. The more people that we have communicating the way that this works, like the better. And I know that like we're kind of preaching to the choir here, where you know this is an ERC-4337 Twitter space hosted by like an infrastructure provider. So there's like so this audience is likely, you know, people who are already like, you know, relatively aware and understand what the benefits can be. But really, the more that people talk about it, and communicate it in the same or slightly different ways, the better off we will all be in getting this moving on. So thank you so much for hosting this Twitter space and for all the education and content that you're creating, as well as everyone else in the ecosystem who is helping push this forward.
Thank you so much. If you haven't already, be sure to follow John on Twitter. His handle is JohnRising_, if I'm not mistaken. He's tagged in our tweet.
Right. I guess I'll track down John Rising _, and claim that account. But yes, until now, John Rising _.
Yeah, he is not Laurence.
I was gonna say, you mean it's not Laurence?
Yeah.
No, this is what I sound like.
If you're building any projects around 4337, also make sure to jump onto our Discord. Laurence will share the link. We should have a 4337 channel, correct?
Yep, it's #ERC-4337.
Yep, we'd love to work with you, whatever you're building. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question today, or if you're listening to the recording and have any questions, we check that and we will be happy to get back to you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.